How are you guys?
All right. Very good. Jesse, how are you?
Somewhere between content, excited, and mildly disappointed. I'm okay.
Okay. Great. How was it? I don't know who else is going to show up. We had an inquiry yesterday about someone joining the meeting today, but I sent them the link. I don't know if they'll be here.
Was that the person with the call who was here?
I
It was
don't-
like phone
Yeah,
icon.
there was a phone. I don't know what that was. I didn't see a phone number. Usually there's a phone number, but well, I mean, no, I sent him the Jitsi link, so I don't know if you join by your phone, it shows up as a phone icon. But
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, so great. So I see Amanda sent some slides, and she has something to maybe share with us in a bit. And then Jesse, you got back from your trip.
Yes. And I'm happy with that. The disappointment that I express is that I just haven't. Today is my first real day to do stuff. I don't know if Brian's going to be here, but Brian mentioned like some writing stuff and co-writing stuff, and I'm really a fan of that. Kind of creating some writing spaces or just normalizing, because I used to do the open office hour stuff. That's in my mind. That's always been there, but I don't always say, "Oh, it's open office hours."
Yeah.
But I think kind of having like open writing hours might be a nice thing. That's kind of a lot of what the rest of the weekend will and should be for me. I've had to do so many obstacles and small things and all the hoops to jump through, and it's like, okay, great.
Yeah.
And I'm tentative, to say otherwise, but I feel like
Right.
I'm happy to finally be through all of that, but it's been tedious, and so it's like I come here, I feel good about it, but then it's like, oh, like, well, what's happened since the reading group, and it's like, not some things have happened, important things have happened, but not everything I wanted to have happened has so far. So.
Good. Yeah, I've had open office hours every now and again for a while. Like, maybe a year ago, I think was the last time I did that, but I think that would be good to do if you want to have open office hours. I would advertise it in the Slack and see if people are interested in joining in. We could do writing or something.
Yeah, Jesse and I have been doing that. It's been fun.
Okay, yeah, you have already.
Yeah, I've just been making a Jitsi room called Writing Room, all caps.
Oh, wow.
And I just go in there and sit in there and write, and if somebody wants to come in.
I've not been there yet, but I was just explaining that, saying like, yeah, like I think that'd be a really cool thing because office hours, I'll do office hours like if you want to talk to me or lab manager office hours, but I think open writing room is also like very inviting, just like like a place to come and informally talk and discuss your stuff.
Yeah, and for me, it's like jogging. Have you guys ever tried to have a jogging
buddy?
buddy?
Running buddy, absolutely.
Yeah, Amanda, sweet.
Yeah,
because that's how it feels. It's like I was doing it the other day, and I was writing, and I was like, okay, this is like jogging. This is great.
Great. Yeah, Jesse. Yeah, that's a great idea, and thank you.
Well, it's generally Brian's idea. I just mentioned office hours too. So, but yeah. So I don't know if I see the phone icon has returned. I don't know if that's a new person or.
We have Jacob. He's a new person.
Is this showing who it is?
The phone icon might be me. It's Erin.
Oh, yeah, it's Erin. Okay, hi. How are you?
Hi.
Yeah, okay. Well, how are you?
I'm still sort of half asleep, but I'm here.
Okay, good.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Me too, kind of.
Yeah. So yeah, Jesse, thanks for the update. Anyone else want to do an update, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. What's my update? What have I been doing? I've been doing a lot of writing, as we were just discussing. Doing a lot of debating of trimming my facial hair, which is getting kind of crazy. But that's not really an update for the lab. And I feel like this is a perpetual update. I don't know why it's so difficult to get the open house presentation together, but that is happening. I'm gonna do that today. I'm gonna set myself a goal today. That's gonna happen because I have a few outtakes of it that I just don't like, so just have to do it again. And then let's see. I'm working on future blog posts and writing projects and like seeds of papers. But nothing really is coming together quite yet. And then let's see, I'm working on a bunch of grad school stuff. And I'm also trying to make a chatbot for the lab to replace Geekbot.
Right.
And I'm very close, but I just haven't had time in like the last week to look at it. But it's exciting.
Oh, that's great.
It sounds like the writing room will be in use today, one way or another. So, how about that?
Yeah, again, yeah, if you could put that in Slack for people to join, like, I don't know, like in the general even, so people
Yeah.
know about it, and then we can
I'll
talk.
make like a little official write-up of how to good,
Yeah.
In fact, we can even make a channel, and then if somebody's in there writing, they could say, "Hey, I'm in the writing room right now." So then, if you want to go write, you can go check and see, "Is anybody in there?" Oh.
Yeah. Well, usually it works if you have like a time when people are there, or you let people know that it's just maybe not everyone can make it, but if someone's around, then But yeah, I'm glad that people are taking the initiative on that. That's great. As for the presentation, yeah, Brian, look forward to it. Amanda's got her presentation; she's working on it as well. So we're getting some progress made on the open house front. Yeah, and then with all the writing projects and that, we can talk about them more if you want to spend time in the meeting during your updates. If you have an issue you have with your writing or you want to show it to people, and you can do that in the writing room, but like a more formal setting where you have people giving feedback, that would be welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been something that's been really helpful in the past. I think for the current stuff I'm working on, I want to sit on it for a little longer. But yeah, thank you. That's
Okay, yeah,
definitely something I'll maybe do next week.
Yeah, right. So, Erin, how are you? I haven't seen you or heard from you in a while.
Yes, I'm doing well. I'm taking a break from lab stuff right now, but I did want to join in and listen to everyone today. I've just been really busy in other projects and barely holding it together, like trying to get everything done.
Oh yeah, and you're always welcome to be here, regardless of what to be super active or anything. But you can
Thank
come.
you.
But it's good, it's good to check in.
Yeah, nice to hear from you again.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoy this group.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So we have a new person attending, Jacob. So Jacob, could you introduce yourself? What your interests are, what your background is, where you're coming from. You can put it in the chat if you can't speak. Hello, Jacob. Yes.
He said hello. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Jacob. Welcome to Saturday morning meetings.
Yeah.
Talking aloud. Yeah, for those who don't know, I guess I should do this. I'm Jesse. I'm kind of the lab manager. I help out with some things, and Bradley's the director of the lab. So, and then it looks like you've probably heard from everybody else, but Amanda, Brian, Erin are Morgan are we've all been here for a while now. Jeez, I think everybody's been in the lab for like at least over a year now. So we have kind of a more senior group in the meeting, I suppose. How about that? I haven't really thought about that. But a nice sort of core group of people we've had for a while.
Yeah.
I've definitely only been here since like February.
It's
It
almost
feels longer.
well, it's been like
It's
10
been great.
months. Yeah, 9 months.
I feel like, well, I guess I'm biased because I've known Amanda like outside the lab in like a very
That's true.
similar reading group capacity. So yeah. Okay, I don't know. Is Morgan, are you back? Are you back in like a place where you can talk more normally, or?
Sorry, I'm still in the car.
Okay. Yeah.
Not the same car, but yes.
Oh yeah. Just circling around for a week in the same car. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. When you have time, if you have time to give an update, you can. If not, that's fine.
I have some other updates, like general updates, like rather project based. Some of them I talked to you about already, Bradley, but I don't know if you want to do that or like move into. I don't know what else you wanted to.
Well, we can move the general updates first. Yeah.
I guess in addition to what I've already said, which is mostly complaining about my lack of time, is in terms of actual projects in the lab, you know, it's kind of shifting to focus on open house stuff. Like that's going to be the main topic of the day. And I also have my plenty of graduate school applications and decisions and ideas on my mind about that. And if people, you know, if we ever want to have like a grad school meeting, we kind of cover it regularly already. And there's a lot of like, you know, asking people who've been through grad school their thoughts about it. And you can always do that. I think we're a really nice environment for that. But if you know, if you ever need formal or informal graduate school questions, feel free to ask anybody around here. I think we're pretty good at that. Bradley's very good at letters of recommendations and that stuff too. But I have decisions about that ahead. In terms of specific projects, there's a few things. One, well, this is not a project, but I don't think I'm going to be going to Society for Neuroscience outright. I kind of want to, but I really need to use the time for other things. I may try to attend virtually, although I don't think they have a virtual option, but I might try to like register and sort of get partial access somehow. I'm working on if that's a good idea for me or not. But in terms of actual projects, there has been some movement on a few things, or at least, well, I'll say this. We had a really nice writing group meeting this Wednesday. We talked about, I don't really have any great notes. I took a few, but they're not really that fun to look at. But we basically are getting to the end of Fuchs chapter 4 and getting through the transparency concept, transparency and resonance, and kind of what Fuchs is doing with this. And it feels really cool to see the model built out the way it is. Like it's kind of like, it's nice. It's not perfect, you know, but like seeing how he's putting stuff together and how he's replacing, he's replacing information and something else with like patterns and something else. Like he's replacing some topics and ideas and trying to modify that into being more. I remember the goal of his efforts was to kind of further solidify what's the subject in the brain relation sense. And it's like, well, if we use these terms, the brain can fade into the background, you know, and it'll be more of a holistic take. And I'm actually quite excited unexpectedly about what's coming up next, because a number of questions I unintentionally brought up during that meeting and maybe before, but especially that meeting kind of led me to think, okay, well, how is Fuchs going to rationalize the social environment or I think he called it like the whole, being a whole person in a world, like being a person of the world or something like that. and the whole next chapter is going to be about not just internal like vertical causality and not just relatively external immediate like proximically surrounding you environment horizontal causality, but then bringing in this whole social cultural extended environment, this whole like I guess life world is a word to use, but like that whole additional space, like that'll be actually quite exciting for me because some topics that have sprung up recently, not necessarily in the lab fully, but in my life, but then also in the lab to an extent, are like neurodivergence, and like how there's variations in these external relations and how the relations affect people. So this is kind of going all the way. I think I said like some kind of a quip about like this is sort of like completing the loop of the whole like experience and how is Cheeks building this really big model at different levels about how internal, like he's going from cells up to organs, up to whole body, up to person engaging with an environment through emotions and these like goal directed like homeostatic or allostatic or environmental things to regulate within the environment, and then you have this big broader aspect of that, which look forward to that. So that's kind of the reading group, and there's the methodologies project, which is sort of underpinning that. And there's been a lot of people are sharing a lot of good articles in Slack and other things, and I kind of want to encourage maybe like a template, like if you read an article or something about a methods that you find interesting, like let's start formalizing that in the methods project, like with kind of like a methods catalog or a methods literature review or something of that nature. I've kind of done that, but I want to kind of push that forward a bit more. There's some longer things to say about mentoring, both in the lab and in like JoPro, the organization that I've kind of put together. But I might return to that. The only other thing I'll say is I may have a very interesting continued, I know I mentioned this a few times, but I think I'm going to have an interesting opportunity to look at one of the most things I most wanted to go to is happening today and tomorrow, I believe, or yesterday and today at Society for Neuroscience. And it's this, I can put this in the Slack perhaps, but basically it was the IEEE Brain Discovery Neurotechnology Workshop, Brain, Mind, and Body. Workshop explores the holistic integration of unobtrusive neurotechnology and medicine, focusing on minimally invasive and regenerative strategies to address invisible disabilities and cultivate harmony, or perhaps resonance, between the brain, mind, and body, a lot of features and environment. But yeah, that looks really cool, and so does measuring complexities. I can share my screen for this, I think. Just quickly here. Measuring complexities in human behavior via the interactions between virtual reality and human physiological networks, evidence from health and disease. VR technologies allow to recreate realistic everyday human settings while controlling and measuring a variety of functions. Here we present a series of cutting-edge studies that paired VR with neurophysiological recordings, ECG, EEG. This approach allows studying the interactions between fundamental functions, motor, cognitive, affective, and provide a window into natural human behaviors with an emphasis on finding biomarkers for specific states in health and disease. Like those two, I would really like to attend both of those things. I probably won't be able to do it in person, but I'm hoping there's some kind of notes or recording available that I can get at. So there's both of those also seem like really interesting paths forward for some projects in the lab too. I know it's kind of to kind of zoom out for a bit. I don't have a really great timeline to show, but we're kind of hitting the end of the year for the lab, and it's we're a big push for the open house stuff and all that, which is great. But I'll start dropping some hints for people in the lab, like, hey, what do you want to be working on next year? Here's some project ideas we have. We've talked about the slow before. We've talked about the developmental AI stuff that is slowly creeping forward. We talked about cognition future stuff, which is rolling forward. I'm pretty happy about that. But there's also like it's kind of time to reach out. We're creating. Casey from UAlbany has reached out, or it's like reminder time. Hey, it's time to start setting up your submissions and forms to have people like call for proposals, call for involvement from folks in different programs in the lab. I know we have a few interns who kind of have come along, or like prospective interns that have kind of checked us out and joined through that. And I feel like, okay, I'm here and I'm ready to start more formally in the winter or in the spring. So that's all coming up. But kind of just to say, the new year's basically here. It's already almost December. In academic time, it's basically next year. So no pressure. I know people probably aren't really thinking about that fully right now, but just a gentle reminder that next year will be here soon. And after finish the open house stuff, and then as you're thinking about that, and that's kind of the goal of that in some ways, implicitly is like, okay, well, what's next for you? What do you want to do? So discussion about that to be had ahead. And I think that's is it very soon? I have to check to make sure I'm here. I think it's next week. I think I'm going to be able to go to it. And I think I'm very happy to do it. Where is it here? Yeah, in 3 days, I have a meeting with New York Celebration of Women in Computing. The conference we regularly attend is kind of focused on accessibility, but also I think almost everyone here has participated in last time, but that's on the radar. And so a few of the things, that's kind of a long list of updates in the lab that are going on. But finally, and I don't know if we want to, this is an extended conversation to have, potentially the mentoring stuff. I had a really interesting conversation this week about mentoring, and I have someone who's entered into kind of a mentoring-ish program through JoPro, which is sort of the supportive organization, literally and figuratively an umbrella organization for a lot of other projects that I'm sort of housing. And someone sort of joined that, and unintentionally, I mean, I've set up some work to that to kind of create structure. They're kind of volunteering to be a test run for that, but not as scripted part of that conversation, but part of the value of, and this is like where a lot of the really good stuff is at conferences or like academic relationships, like the sort of unexpected conversation. We had a long conversation unexpectedly about like the lack of I forgot how we got onto it even, but the short version is, even in the liberal arts college sense, like a lot of the interdisciplinary work is, go take 101 or 102 of whatever subject you're, sociology 101 or neuroscience 101 or whatever, and like go to that. And okay, now you know stuff. But what we don't have as much is, particularly in a constructive sense, having in one course or in one environment, like sincere, useful, constructive discussion about what it's like in different fields, how people are using concepts, how people are using, like in philosophy, the goal and the skills you're trying to build and what you're using may be different than sociology or anthropology. Like the lenses that you're using and why. Like obviously, like biology and physics, there's some overlap, but there's differences in terms of, what part of the natural sciences you're focusing on, and what And even more so, like a lot of times, I think a nice way to say it in this camp in the conversation is a lot of times I will hear or I've heard, oh well, this person they're an engineer, so they're going to see it this way, or this is a biologist, so he's going to have this sort of bias. He's going to want to see it this way, or this is a physics person, and they just want to get they're going to have this approach to it, or oh, that's a mathematician, they're going to want to see it this way, and you kind of hear these implicit things, and unless you have domain specific knowledge, you're not really going to know what does that mean. Like what does that mean? How do you? It takes, and some of it can be literally takes experience to do. Like you're not gonna get a shortcut for it. I understand that. However, this kind of stems way back to like early frontier map concepts, but like there are some things that can be made explicit in that process, or at least exposure to people sincere. And I emphasize sincerely and constructively, because I understand why there isn't this big jolly like Hogwarts kind of style, like, oh, we're all going to sit at the big table, we're going to discuss the merits of our houses and our disciplines. Like, I understand why it doesn't happen, at least most ugly of which is just straight up departmental political bias and rivalry and ugliness between people and funding and wanting to come out on top. That's a factor. It's a big factor, and it's hard to do. But that said, I also feel like it's a poor excuse not to have something like this that could at least offer a little bit of more concrete insight into, like, you can go to the website, like, oh, as a you can look online and say, oh, what does a neuroscientist do? Like, you can find those like kind of generic websites, but there's really not a lot of what I would consider good material about like the meta aspects of interdisciplinary communication or exposure, or like, oh yeah, you're going to want to understand some of these key concepts when you're dealing with the philosopher or the mathematician. Like, even if not the concepts or like the theorems or whatever, like, what is it that this person is going to be trained to look for, and what can you be aware of in that kind of communication? And the conversation I had with the mentee, I suppose, is just how much that's not been a case and how much that would have affected some of their like career paths, both in school and after school. And it basically, unintentionally, that's what they're doing now, is trying to sort out again, okay, they went to undergrad, they did this, they did that. They want to have it maybe a different career than what they have now to an extent. And what actual day-to-day tools do they want to be using in their life? So that's kind of where it came about. And I think there's a lot of parallels to interdisciplinary research that we talk about here in the lab, a lot of parallels to Frontier Map, a lot of parallels to how do we get people up to speed, and also rerouting all the way back to the grad panel thing that I talked about a couple weeks ago when I was on my other business trip. Wow. Okay, so that was 3 weeks ago. And then I'm ingrained in my memory. Now would this be episodic memory or the other memory? I think it's episodic. But ingrained in my memory is a very candid and real remark. And it was candid, but it was just straight. It was just someone just talking straight talk, saying, this tenured faculty person basically said, we as mentors are not trained to be mentors. And it was a nudge to getting incoming people to say, hey, you have to make sure your graduate advisor gives you them about mentoring, because some don't. It was just kind of a fair warning about that. But in another sense, the conversation dipped this way, but implicitly and explicitly there was like, yeah, like, where is the training for that? And that, I think, a lot of the work we talk about in the lab for mentoring education is geared towards mentees coming into vague situations, but a lot of it implicitly is and to be built out in the future, and already in my mind is happening in certain ways. Like, this is training for mentors too, for the people who are doing that. and I think there's a certain lack of that, and I've seen across many domains, particularly involved in these. It seems particularly of importance in interdisciplinary, exploratory, novel areas of research, because it's you gotta. At least I feel that immense responsibility bringing people into stuff. That's kind of why I know I'm not always very good at it, but that's why I try to throw background and context to people that are coming into situations. And it's kind of funny. My last note is that I, as a very young person, I remember getting into an argument with an older person because I was trying to make a point, and this person said to me, young Jesse, they didn't say that, but basically what it's young Jesse, like, you're not really explaining the context of your remarks. So the people that you're trying to communicate with aren't going to understand it. And I remember being frustrated. I'm like, why do I have to do that? This is just what I think. It's like, this is just what I think about stuff. This is, and I was so frustrated that I would just have to like, why should I care about their context at all? Like, this is what I think. And I remember that, and it's so funny now, because it's like everything that I'm doing is attempting to address that very strong conviction I had that was very not useful. I guess just not a useful way to approach stuff. I totally get it. And I like the truth, the feeling that I had was legitimate in a way, but like in terms of any constructive, this keyword constructive, those things don't help. So the more you can, and understanding your role, like as, like if you step into this space, kind of inherently you become a mediator. You are a diplomat, you are a facilitator, you are a translator, and that's, you got to prepare people for that. So anyway, that's my sermon. I'll call it a sermon about this stuff. You saying something, Brian? I know you kind of came on a bit. Okay, cool. There's a lot more to say about that, but I feel like not really a major project right now, but I feel like in the background and in relation to some JoPro stuff, like building out that stuff will likely be a theme of stuff. And I kind of want to, UOpen has a really, really, really good school of education. And it kind of harkens back to, like, I had a really formative experience there when I was doing peer mentoring stuff. And I'm kind of close to one of the, I don't think they're in that place anymore, but I would love to kind of get like make a specific internship design for someone from that area in this way. Because I feel like I took a course that wasn't directly, it was directly about this. It was like 80 to 85% like covering exactly what I said in a less, not with the refinement of what I said. But I would love to get like an educational policy or programs intern, just to kind of get what they're, and even if just to get what like their exposure as someone who like helps to create curriculums or whatever, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I will open any comments about that. Then we can move on after that. I don't want to take too much more time.
We have any comments? Looks like we got a couple things in the chat here. Morgan said, yeah, Russ Poldrack had a blog post about this recently to interdisciplinary neurotech students at Stanford. So I don't know the link for that. If someone can find it, that would be great. But yeah, that sounds like something that I think people probably have thought about before, but not really done much about. It's always the problem is doing it. Okay, thanks, Morgan.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. Like, we had a lot of conversation on this is going to work here. Yeah. We had a lot of the conversation about like implicit versus explicit, and I think that's been I don't know if that's from writing something or something else, but like there's been this discussion about like the process. I'm kind of in. I know this is something I'll bring up in the writing stuff, but like there's this process of like making the process of making things as explicit as you can, and like how much that affects stuff. And I feel like this is like one of the greatest examples of that I can kind of think of in this context, because everything about this whole conversation about the different fields of study and the people and all that,
Yeah.
or like what a different field of study. Oh, they're this discipline, so they're gonna have this bias, ha 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 ha, and they're not gonna see it. So you gotta understand that's always been like super implicit and rarely ever explicit. And so I feel like that's part of the challenge is like, and I know the limit. I still understand very well why it doesn't happen, both in the constructive political, debate sense and want to look good sense. Like I get that, but also just like it's hard to do. It's not really easy to accurately say, hey, here's some quick facts about talking to people across disciplines. Like that's not really easy to do, because if you're wrong, you could be setting someone up badly. But anyway, we can move on now.
Any other comments? I don't know. Brian had his camera on. I don't know if he had something he wanted to talk about or mention.
No, I just usually leave my camera on because it's nice to see people's faces.
Yeah.
But I'm dealing with some dog stuff right now, so it might be on and off.
All right. So yeah, I like this idea. I think it's useful. Like I said, people haven't done anything about it, but they talk about it. I was sketching out some things about like, just your post got me thinking about some interdisciplinary goals for like teaching people how to do interdisciplinary research and interactions and things like that. Not necessarily like a course where you take two things and you put them together, but like a course that's kind of meta like that, where you have like, what do you need to know to do interdisciplinary research? Say I want to do something at the interface of like, social science and technology or neuroscience and technology, and bringing those together. How do you do that? You can learn the points of each field, like to say this is a smattering of different topics in this field, and then leave it at that. That's not useful necessarily, because you've just given them exposure to different things, and you've not told them how to put them together or how to like seek out new areas of knowledge. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, I know this thing from this course, and I don't know how they relate. Sometimes, so sometimes that's useful for some people, but not everyone, and certainly it doesn't really tend to translate beyond that area. So I was sketching out, and I don't have the notes with me. I'll write them up. Maybe I'll present them next week. Like 5 or 6 points on how to do, like how to start a good solid base of interdisciplinary research. So I think one of them was, you want to establish what the fields, the history of the fields, maybe give an idea of like what you're building towards. So we would use like the concept maps. We would use things like literature review and synthesis. So learning how to find things in the literature, finding things from years ago, finding things from recently, and then putting them together in a way that says, I understand that sort of how this idea was used in this field, in field X, and it's not used in field Y. And then, how do you bridge that gap? Because it's a conceptual gap that's pretty big that some people won't get. And then related to that, you have these and we've talked about this in the Cognition Futures group, is that you have terminology differences. Mm-hmm. So like, I could say something like hysteresis, and like in one field it might mean something, in another field it might mean something slightly different. There's a common term that is used sort of colloquially, but like in certain fields you get like, if you get deep enough into the field, you have the term is like defined even more richly, but sometimes it differs between different fields. So that's, if you're talking to some group of people who are, from one field versus another, versus just people who don't know anything about either field, you throw out a term like that and their mind goes somewhere else. And so that's a barrier because, usually in education, you want to set the floor for things and then build up. You want to say, okay, here's basically what you need to know, the base of what you need to know. Then we'll build this next thing, which is like not applying it, but the next level of knowledge. And then maybe applications to like experiments or to like some technology or something. So you start with like a base of like definitions and terms. If you've been in class, you know what I'm talking about. Definitions and terms, basic concepts and tools, and then maybe how those things come together, and then you then start to apply them. So but this can be done interdisciplinarily. So you would take like two fields, or better yet, just have a generic model for saying, we can take any two fields and bring them together, but we have to recognize that there are these barriers, and those are the barriers we need to address. So there are things like synthesis and figuring out the history of things and figuring out the terminology space and figuring out some other things. And that's, I think, the key to some of this.
I think in one sense, sort of what we're talking about and what you just said is sort of like a final boss ultimate version of an output from like a series of frontier map projects. Like if you mapped both like frontier mapping, just to kind of be canonically true, which is a questionable thing to say here, but like frontier map version, which is like how do you have one person go, like how do you aid them through a journey of whatever field it is, particularly a progressive or like, interdisciplinary boundary level frontier field, sure. But this, what we're talking about here is like almost like a super map of like potentially, it's sort of whereas frontier map is basically originally discipline agnostic or whatever, or also like platform agnostic in terms of the technology itself. I feel like like having it would be really useful just to kind of have this. It's basically like a I don't even want to say cheat sheet, but like an actual concept map. Like it feels like something more than a map, but in the sense of like, here, because you can't, you're going to have limitations of what you can say, but like there's certain there's I want to say this specifically. It's more than exposure. Like exposure kind of isn't really enough. You can't just say, I feel like that's, here's your level 100, here's stuff. So psychology, there's behaviorism, and then there's stuff after behaviorism too. And it's like, okay, like sure, like great. But like, as I'll go back to my other phrase of the last month, is like you can't tell what someone is arguing until you know who's arguing against. And this is basically all about that. Like you have to have this sort of functional differentiation, not to make it too binary, but you have to understand the relative, as Erin would know what I mean when I say the structural logic of how things are structured or oriented or adjacently to each other. You have to kind of, as much as that may not be the most important thing in the world, to an extent, it's kind of, this is kind of what we're getting at, the minimum level of structural knowledge about where relatively things are juxtaposed to each other, just so you can understand, okay, here's where a lot of this energy or narrative or directive has been pushed. Because I think the bigger thing is like, that's what you're communicating with. You're communicating with somebody who's been trained with this sort of like the flow of the river is going in this direction, and you can talk to the individual, but you're also talking to their training to an extent. And I think that's really hard to you can't just that's always reserved for really like high level discussion. But I don't think it needs to be necessarily. You can just talk about it and I think it's important to do with a lot of humility and this is like the heavy disclaimers. This is an incomplete picture, right? But I think that would help a lot of. It would really facilitate a lot of things and reduce a lot of the friction. I just remember now too. I actually recorded some of the discussion, and I'm glad I did. I didn't look at it, but I just remembered something here. What this also addresses, what we're talking about, is a lot of people come into fields of study, and like I've done this a few times, and I've been fortunate that it's worked out. Like when I first studied political science, international relations, I knew nothing about it, as pretty much most people don't. Like any field of study that you go into, especially when you haven't studied a lot, like before college, it's an in-depth field of study with its own specific stuff. And I was like, oh man, I don't know anything. And I felt that I didn't know anything very much for a long time. And like a year and a half later, it's like, oh, things in sports here, the game is slowing down for me now. And I feel like in academic terms, like, oh, there's just less and less totally new information that is hard for me to string together and connect dots about. And I've been in that process, and I know I can come out on the other side of it. And this is kind of, if anybody remembers my caveat at the reading group, not caveat, but my at the reading group last time, part of why I got so excited about Fuchs in the next chapter about his like social cultural stuff is because I highlighted what is it like when someone's brain or functioning can accurately do a lot of the resonance. They could, like, the brain, like all the necessary components for making resonance between internal, external, like the brain and the body, all the pieces there, but they have this sort of metacognitive weight, and you could say, oh, that's like trauma or messaging from other people that you aren't smart enough, or you don't understand, your comprehension is wrong. Like there's sort of a cultural or social, or you can say like voices that what does Fuchs say about that? And I feel like going back to this part here, there's such a critical period, if you will, very generously used here. There's such a critical moment of like, if you never have the experience of grasping a field of study that's totally new to you, you will not know, oh, I can get through this very long, arduous period of knowing nothing and not knowing how to connect dots. But the faith and the ability, like the confidence and the experience of connecting dots, I feel like that's really big. And we talked with the mentee I was discussing with, we spent a solid time on this aspect where, like, if you don't do that and you kind of just if that ends there, then you're kind of, it's kind of a bottleneck or a gateway. Like if you don't get past it, then your relative comfort or ability in even gaining passing fluency in other fields can be really diminished. It can really weigh you down in that. And so to this end, I think what we're talking about, anything that helps people get through that process faster and know, okay, I can do this, is really big. And I know we here get this, but just to kind of put this, like, to say this or to record this to an extent, I feel like if you are to take seriously that interdisciplinary research and the space across and between and around fields matter, and that's where the future is, you need to care about this. Or you implicit, even if you don't consciously do right now, you do care about this because this is going to save time and build critical literacy and fluency in those areas. And so to that end, it's like, well, like, this is sort of necessary, like, infrastructure or proto-infrastructure to doing that. Like it generates affordances to do the other stuff. And it's like, unless you're doing that or caring about that or actively cultivating that, then you're kind of like, you're missing opportunities to facilitate things we don't have time to waste about. So another sermon, but I think there's a lot of really valid points on all of that. And that's kind of why I kind of want to pitch this to the person at the School of Education that I know and see.
What they think, yeah.
Yeah, I'll get like an intern about this basically, but
Yeah.
we can move on to other stuff that's almost the next hour.
All right. So the link, Morgan put a link in the chat to this. Actually, this is the IEEE Brain Discovery Neurotechnology Workshop. So that's in the chat. Let's see if I can share my screen. Actually, I'll just share my screen for this, and then I'm going to talk about a couple other things too. So this is this workshop that's happening. I think it happened this week. This is on some of these issues in neurotechnology. So there are a lot of interesting things on neural drug discovery, neuroelectronics, wearable healthcare, adaptive neuromodulation. How is the brain reprogrammed in Alzheimer's disease? I don't know if that has cellular reprogramming involved, but such stuff as dreams are made, computational tale of optimal transport and brain clearance. So these are things that occur with respect to some of neurodegeneration and disease and brain-machine interfaces and things like that.
I feel like such stuff as dreams are made needs someone to just bust in the room, almost like a purpose, and say,
Yeah.
Don't you mean sweet dreams are made of these? Is the real title to your workshop? But that's a deep cut.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
But yeah, and then there are even neuroethics and clinical applications, engineering plasticity and primate cortex using optogenetics, which is a source of light that you put into you shine onto cells. You can turn them on and off, or you can affect them in certain ways. And then they have a neurotechnology development and commercialization panel. I think this is what Jesse is talking about with respect to this is SFN. Okay, so this is happening at SFN, but this is actually, looks like, I don't know if you could get access to some of these materials. It'd be probably pretty interesting for...
I'm going to try to do that, basically.
Okay.
Try to weasel my way in there, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm not going to spend too much more time, just to let you know that this is happening. This is, and usually you can go and find out more about some of the authors or some of the topics. Okay. Next thing I wanted to talk about is something I attended this week. And I don't know, I think maybe a couple other people may have been interested in the lab. I don't know if people actually got to do this. But it's Brain Criticality, this workshop that the NIH hosted. And so they were hosting it in person at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, which is the main campus for NIH. They have a lot of really nice presentation, technology there. And, this is a group that it attracted like physicists and biophysicists and neuroscientists and biologists and computational people of different stripes. So you had a lot of different, again, one of these interdisciplinary groups. And the topic was brain criticality, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it was a probably 3-day session. You had the physical session in Bethesda, and then you had the virtual session on Zoom. The first day of the program, you had, a series of talks. They talked about this thing called criticality in the brain, and they had a bunch of different talks on, and oscillatory bursts, machine learning applications, excitation, inhibition, balance. So there was a lot of stuff at the cellular level. Then you had even some collective behavior, actually, which I found interesting. Like you had, people thinking about criticality in flocks and swarms of animals. So they all have brains and they're behaving socially, but this sort of criticality aspect is happening in those groups. So they're going up a number of scales to get to this. Then they had some more physics-related topics. So they talked about criticality as like a physical concept and some of the aspects of how that works. They had this thing. There's this thing called neuronal avalanches, Gelman low criticality, quasi-critical brain dynamics, and edge of instability, critical dynamics. So these are all things from physics that talk about, what criticality is and how it behaves. So criticality is an idea from physics, and I think we've talked about this in previous meetings. There's a sandpile model, which is, if I go to my Jamboard, there's a sandpile model, which is where you have a model of sort of critical failure. So let's take a sand pile. This is a bunch of grains of sand piled up like this. And we're dropping sand grains from this stage up here. And they drop to this sort of point. You start building it up from nothing, and the grains build up, and they build this pile. And the idea is that you keep dropping sand grains at a certain rate, and the sand grains roll off to the side, and they form this pile, which is kind of like a triangle. At some point, though, you can trigger an avalanche. This side becomes unstable, or this side becomes unstable, and you end up with a quick and rapid displacement of grains. So the grains fall down here and cause an avalanche. That avalanche then is, usually displacement is only a couple of grains from the top and they roll down. But in an avalanche, you get thousands and thousands of grains that fall off. And this is the Bach-Tang-Weisenfeld model, which is, and you'll find this in the literature. And this is just basically the idea that you have this sand pile, and the sand pile can represent a lot of things. It doesn't have to be a pile of sand. It can be the dynamics of the brain. It can be social dynamics. It can be a lot of things that are structured in this way. You have to think about your problem as a series of sand grains, and there's this, in the case of brain criticality, it's displacement across the network, but this is a basic model. So this is of course what they call a phase transition when you get an avalanche. So you get these phase transitions that occur relatively rarely, and if you plot them out on a plot, if you have like a linear plot here. Actually, I'll do a log plot. I'll show you how this works. If I can get this right. So you get something like this. You'll see plots like this a lot. And this area here is the sort of the displacement where your data points are. This is sort of the frequency of the displacements. And if you do a linear plot, it looks like this. It's a power law with a long tail. So power law describes the frequency of events. Basically, you have a small number of large events and a large number of small events. So you have a large number of events where only a couple of sand grains get displaced from the top, and a small number of events where a large number of grains get displaced. So you get these two. This is a log plot. This is a linear plot. It just describes this sort of process. And so this is sand pile. And again, if you're coming from physics, people have studied the sand pile model. They've done that. This is a dynamical system. All right. And then you can apply it to networks, which is relevant to the brain, or to even collective behavior where you're dealing with like flocks and swarms of organisms. And you have these, critical sort of transition points where there are changes in the system. That's what you're interested in. So this is day 1, and then day 2 and day 3 had, this is the wrong one. Day 2 and day 3 had, this is day 2, you had Beggs and Plenz, Dietmar Plenz and John Beggs, who's on day 1. They kind of came up with this avalanche model, but for the brain. So they were observing things in rat cortex, and they were looking at displacements of activity and rapid changes in activity, and they were able to characterize it as a sand pile model. So that, their work is kind of core to a lot of this. Bradley Wojtek was there. He was talking about oscillations and criticality. So they had people from outside of the criticality literature give talks as well, which I found was interesting because it gave a little bit of context to some of this stuff. It wasn't like you were talking to yourself about this a lot. There were people from outside of that area who could give a perspective on it. And then, there was different types of modeling. This was a nice talk, Living Orbs of Life, the Physics of Firefly Communication. So fireflies behave collectively. They come out and they have these little sacs in their tail filled with luciferase, which is an enzyme that glows, and they can apply electricity and it glows. And what they can do in a group is they can synchronize their activity, their glowing activity or their firefly activity. And they do this in a communicative way, and they can do it by synchronizing with each other's behavior. But it's a neural process because it goes on inside their body. And so they can synchronize, and there's a nice literature on synchronization in firefly models. It goes back to Stephen Sturgatz, and the Kuramoto model of oscillators is actually something from physics that's also applicable. So you have these oscillators that are synchronized. Basically, oscillators are individual fireflies. We'll put little oscillations there. And the idea is that they have to synchronize together. And the Kuramoto oscillator is a mathematical model that you can use to look at that. Kuramoto actually used it, I think, in the brain first, or with general oscillators, like, different types of pendulum and clocks. And then Stephen Sturgatz did a popular take on this about 20 years ago, where he talked about synchronization of fireflies. And Orit is following up on a lot of that work with her own work on firefly communication. So it's really interesting. And then day 3 had some other talks in the same spirit, different things about rhythms and oscillations and how you can interpret that in terms of brain criticality and even brain-inspired machine learning, utilizing dynamics, which is really interesting because then you're moving from like something that you think is happening in the brain to an artificial intelligence model, which uses those principles in what was what they call reservoir network, which is a large container that's filled with like a random network, and it takes inputs and puts out outputs, and it's kind of a fashionable model for looking at the brain. It's more brain inspired than, say, like a generic deep learning model. But it was a really interesting talk because it used these brain criticality dynamics as sort of a matter of course. And so, yeah, this was a really good workshop. I have I don't know if, the notes document is here. So this is the workshop. This is the in-person set part of it. Then this just kind of goes over the beginnings of this area. So in the 1980s, this Tang-Weisenfeld model was developed. This is where you have these different states. In this case, this is not the sandpile model. This is actually like a model of stability. So you have disorder and order. You can go from a gas to a crystal, and you have this critical phase in between. And they're making an analogy between physical systems and things like the brain or societies or other types of systems. And so this is in the 1980s, they worked on this. In the late 80s, there was the sandpile model, which also sort of, allowed us to sort of have a model for these dynamics. In the 1990s, this was applied to the brain by Dante Chialvo and some other people. Then nowadays, they're doing all sorts of experiments, not just in the brain, but in other areas. And so this criticality is this period of change. This is the Beggs and Plenz experiments or something similar where they look at neural firing avalanches. So they look at the firing rate in rat cortex. They put it on an electrode array and they measure the activity, and they get these bursts of activity which are analogous to these avalanches. There is a talk on oscillations and information processing. There are some talks on collective behavior, especially this order transition, which is where you go from something like an ordered region to a disordered region. And there's this critical phase where you get this rapid change in your control. If you're like aligning yourselves in a certain way, you're ordered, you're all flying in the same direction as a bird flock, and then all of a sudden that order collapses and you fly in different directions. And it's just because you're hitting some aspect of that system, some parameter in the system is changing. At a certain point, it changes enough so that the whole system becomes disordered. Again, this goes back to like glasses and other types of physical systems. And there's a nice analogy there. There are some really nice slides in this workshop. This is one where they talk about the brain as this subway map. It's like homeostasis, adaptation, learning, and they just have this cute graphic. But they talk about testing the stability of the critical network state. So they're looking at the stability and where this critical point actually is in a real system. They had other aspects like crackling, which is a phenomena that they've identified that actually triggers these rapid changes. Let me see. Oh, they had some talks where they tried to apply some of these to neuromorphic chips. So not only the reservoir computing, but neuromorphic chips as well. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Again, you're going from like physics to the brain to neuroscience, and then when you get that link established between the two fields, you then can build technologies. Once you understand, that link between the two areas and the terminology, and then how things work, and then you can move on to the technologies and the applications. This is the reservoir computing talk, where there's this reservoir computer that has an input layer and output layers. And this idea is about 20 years old, but it's really a nice model for like learning. It's very different from deep learning because it allows you to have feedbacks, and there are differences between deep learning and reservoir computing that make reservoir computing a little bit easier to handle and use smaller data sets on. They also had some talk on organoids. Actually, this was Bradley Wojtek who talked about some of the organoid work. I think he's doing it with Alison Moultrie, and he's looking at organoids and oscillations in the brain, but using organoids to do this work. So it's really interesting to look at the origins of oscillations. So they're actually able to look in development at some of these oscillations. And of course, these oscillations are key for understanding this brain criticality, for brain dynamics and all this. And it's interesting work. This is quasi-critical brain dynamics. This was the talk by John Beggs. Just showing like this process of displacement in a toy model, which means you build a very simple model. You show the process of change or communication between neurons, and you get these points where you get these sort of avalanches that occur, these cascades that occur as a result of it could be a perturbation, it could just be a random process, but they were able to actually model this and look at it in terms of how communication between neurons works. And they were showing different aspects of this, where this plot, which is the log plot, which I showed you here, or that's here, right here, this one, that is here, and you can see that you can shift the exponent around, or the function, the sort of the curve fit. You can shove it further down this axis by doing certain things and having certain conditions met. So these statistical signatures are, one of these things that, they're not absolute. They talked about universality, and they found that maybe these aren't as universal as they think it is. Universality being means it applies in all cases. So there were some interesting side discussions like that maybe these things aren't as universal as we think they are. So again, this is an interdisciplinary thing where you have, you're having these side conversations about definitions. When you look at someone's data, you say, does this fit the data? Is this concept really hold water? This is really how you do interdisciplinary science. It's really nice. So this is available. I can make this available to people if you want to look it over. That's just a sampling of the slides that were there. I just put them in there because I thought those were some of the more interesting ones. But yeah, it was a really good time. Okay, so I had some things in the chat here. Let's see. Morgan said Russ just moved his blog from Blogger to GitHub pages. Seems to be down right now, so that That was the Russ Poldrack post. Then Jesse said, Steven Strogatz, do we have any recommended readings or resources from him? Yeah, you go to his website. He's at Cornell. He has a lot of papers, but the book that I'm thinking of is called Sync, SYNC, and it's a popular book. I don't know if it's still in print, but you can get it probably from a library. And it's about it talks about like his experiences with his education and doing a lot of applied math, and then this book. Well, he has a number of books. Nonlinear dynamics and chaos, I think, is more technical, but Sync is the one that I'm thinking of. And so, he talks in this book is explicitly about firefly synchronization and some of the stuff that they do. And of course, that field's moved quite a bit since then. So it's really interesting work, though. And then after this is over, can you show the title? Yeah. Oh, the title of the conference. So this was let me share my screen again.
Oh, sorry, I realized I was muted. I wanted to take a screen cap.
Okay, so let me go to this braincriticality.org.
All right, 3, 2, 1, cheese. Great. All right, cool.
All right, yeah, that's good. And then, visually. Okay, awesome. He just did 2 lectures at SFI. Steven Strogatz, yeah, he did. He's pretty prolific. And then Amanda said, thank you, Bradley, for the overview. Super interesting. Well, you're welcome. So, all right. So I talked to Amanda this morning, and she sent me a link to her. She's working on an open house talk. And I don't know if you wanted to just kind of go over it a little bit and talk about what you wanted to do. I have the slides here, but you can put them, you can share your screen as well.
I don't really want to share the slides yet.
Okay.
I think as I work on actually recording the presentation, I'll have to reorganize my thoughts a bit.
Okay.
But I guess the general big idea is how do we do neurophenomenology in practice? So that would require, and this is basically the methodologies project, right? Like looking at specific methodologies for gathering first personal data and how that could even possibly, in theory, constrain third personal study, and then vice versa. So that's the biggest idea.
Very.
Yeah, I guess that's all I want to say now. But I think I can share the slides. I think I just shared it with Bradley and Jesse so far.
Okay.
But I can share it more generally, and I'm happy to receive comments.
Okay. So yeah, that sounds really interesting. Just keep working on it and don't worry about the time. I mean, just try to get it down where you feel comfortable with it, and then don't worry about the timing. Like when you give it, like you don't have to constrain it to 5 minutes. You can go a little bit longer. I just want to give people some time to actually explain what they're trying to do. And I know philosophy is kind of hard in that way because you have to get into a concept. But I mean, just try to make it, kind of. You don't want to go into too much detail though, too. Right. I mean, but that's good just to give people an idea of what you're working on and how it goes through that process.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying that sounds great. I look forward to seeing it. So anything, I hope the writing room, or just in general, I really want to continue to normalize like sharing and talking about your work and stuff, and helping it, like the running jogging buddies stuff, definitely. So I think we're all moving forward greatly. And who's done the least on their slides so far? It's me. So I'm calling out on that. So to be coming, but good.
Right. Yeah. That's great. I know. I have you down for a couple things, but I don't know what we want to do. I know there's the mentorship thing, and I don't know if you want to do. I mean, I don't want to force your hand on it, but whatever you want to do on that is. I think we should have one talk on mentorship.
Are you going to be around after the meeting at all today, Bradley, or tomorrow?
I can be around tomorrow, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm on the list for a few things, and basically I'm gonna a goal for this weekend for me is just at least probably finish something, but like draft everything this weekend, if not finish it. So if there's something that's not on the list that you want me to do, like I forget actually where the specific list is because we have all of them, and so whatever I'm scheduled to do, I want to do, and I may add something else onto it also. But I just want to like be totally on the same page with you about that. So yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah. Let's we can maybe do it tomorrow or.
Yeah. Is it in the open house channel or?
So yeah, let's go over that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Right, so let me go to my Slack open here. We have open house. This is the open house channel, and we have the programming slide or the programming worksheet here. So this is I've got a bunch of them done already with the green. I've just been putting, and so if you want to look at a good example of how this is done, you can go to the YouTube channel. There's a playlist, open house, and you can see.
Oh yes, I saw
like,
your physics one a little bit. That was really cool.
Yeah. So I mean, and then we have, and I've just put down like for Jesse organizational tools, which I think you've done in another context. You've done a video where it's like you show people how to use Notion, or you show people how to use something else like Obsidian, and you just kind of like or a GitHub project board, just showing those things, and it could be probably longer than 10 minutes actually. Now that I think about it, but we're not constrained by time, like I said. Then maybe the internship program, and that again, I don't know. That may just be like we have an internship program. Here's how to become involved. This is what we're going to learn. It's not, probably not that much work. Then I had like people down for different things. They expressed interest. So Brian and Amanda were working on theirs. They're working from a template, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so yeah, we have this. And then Morgan said he wanted to do one. Daniela, Samantha, and the timeline on this isn't like immediate. You can do this at your leisure. What we're doing is we're putting these up on YouTube sort of asynchronously. So they're going up to YouTube in the channel, and then people can look through the channel and they can find different videos. But then we also want to be able to like repackage this stuff later. So we want to say, here's this thing on this project, and this, this is going to become dated at some point, but this is just a good overview of the project or at some point in time. And then that'll give people an idea of what's going on in that project. And so, yeah, we'll probably have updates to these next year.
I can't get to this.
I did
Okay, sorry, I couldn't find a link. As a really minor side note, has there been some change in Slack about starred channels? Maybe I had too many of them, but I feel like both Hussein's one channel and this channel should have been starred. But they weren't. So I restarred them, and now they're back at the top for me. But I did find this, so I'm gonna add at the bottom. I'll do it like a couple spaces down, just like perspective things, like and these may not these maybe not all be things for like to talk about during the main event, but like if I might just there are some ideas here that I just wanted to mention just because I may bang them out all at one go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is asynchronous, so you can just create a video and I can put it up.
I don't think we have anything for mentoring because that's basically a whole team. That's basically a whole like banner. There's also a potential like Cognition Futures banner, and we don't none of the ones on here on the list currently are for mentoring specifically, right? I don't think so.
No. Internship program probably would just be a very brief internship program related thing, just how to do that. But then there might be a deeper discussion about mentoring. that you might want to do.
Definitely. The internship I think will be really quick and just like boom, 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 boom. Here, I'll show some of the blog posts. I'll show kind of relationship with you all, but that'll be good. Mentoring can be. I'll just put them all down here because I don't want to screw this list.
Yeah.
But is there anything while I'm here? Is there anything that we kind of talked about potentially putting here that I should put on the list, even as a reach thing or like something else? Maybe not for the open house, but like I feel like there's a few things that maybe I just want to have all my ducks in a row about this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna probably do them today, and then I want to kind of maybe I can review them with you tomorrow or something. But
Yeah.
Just like do it. So yeah.
So there's a society ethics in tech, and I leave that up to you, to your discretion, how you want to update on that. I mean, that can be like 5 minutes. That could be like from one of these templates.
Oh yeah, I have. That's gonna be super great because I can do a dovetail into and here's a call for proposal.
Yes.
Which is actually due quite soon, I think.
Yeah.
Let me check for that.
And then it may be like a cognition futures update. I don't know how I want to do that. If I want to talk. In some of these, I talk about the reading group, sort of like the annual report. This first one, I talk about the reading group to some extent. So people are getting that. But what happens is you get like different slices of these things. So like in the annual report, I talk about GSOC, and I have other GSOC videos, and then developmental AI is sort of in the annual report, but then we kind of go in a different direction for the update. And, so those are things like the cognition futures might be good if you just want to go over like what the main idea of it is. Like
my goal, and I don't know, I know you probably didn't use this in the annual report, but just to kind of bring this up again, because I'm so, very proud of myself, as always. I think fleshing out this map, we got Diva Wormy did, we got this one. Mentoring and education maybe fits with this one, cognition futures one. And then I feel like representational brains maybe kind of fits with the Dev AI stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe not really, but like I think that's covered. I feel like at least having these major banners covered, I think is pretty good. And it sounds like that's kind of what we're doing. I just wanted to put like, so we can show this map, say, hey, here's blah, 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 and then we can have the beauty of this and many materials, we can just use them later to explain and onboard people. So that's good. But I don't think anything's missing. I don't think anything's hugely missing from this map, especially if you're doing Diva Worm and the other stuff you mentioned. So
yeah, I think that's a good map. Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
And just to give people an idea of where we are with respect to these different things, like, they're always changing, but I don't think it's like we need to get into the details of that.
If you don't mind, it may be like in the auxiliary material too. I may do like a really small teaser for plot twisters, just because we are doing a lot of stuff there. Like totally kind of we're the external collaborator with them, but we are doing stuff there. It might be a cool thing for people to kind of come into doing. So I'll maybe put that on my list.
Yeah, I think that's good.
I'm super ambitious now, and then what do I do? See what actually comes out. But
so that's this is what we're doing here. So, and then we want to have at some point this discussion, which is a feature of CogSci. So we've had there's a special issue of
Cognitive Science Society.
Yeah, and they had
great essays.
They had all these essays where people laid out different problems, different visions for the future of cognitive science. So what I want to do there is I want to invite people to come in and pick a paper and then attend, and they all kind of present very briefly these papers, and then we have a discussion. And this would be like in Jitsi. It wouldn't be live streamed, but we would have like broader discussion, maybe hopefully like a pretty decent attendance, like our group here, and then we can have a discussion afterwards. And then I think that would be useful, just to have like a more of a group conversation about these things, so that we can go back and look at it, or new people can see where the issues are. And then these things go viral. Hopefully, they get a lot of traction, a lot of attention, maybe. So that can be good. So back to the Slack channel. If you want to do a I don't even know if it's in here. I don't remember where I put the templates. They could be in the general channel here. Because I think I put them in the general channel as a. I didn't want to open up Brian's necessarily, but I may have to repost them in there because I don't even see them in here.
They may be at the top. Oh, I'm in the wrong channel again. I would imagine they're probably. Where did it go? What is the actual channel called for this again?
Open House, but I don't know where the templates are. I couldn't find them right away. Well, anyways, we have templates that are available for this, and we have two templates. We have the sort of the project template, and then we have like the big ideas template. The big ideas template is, like if you like, I think it's more like what Amanda's doing, where you have this big idea, you explain it, versus like a project template, which would be for like a specific project where you'd give like updates, what we want to accomplish, these sorts of things. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Brian found the templates in here. Okay. Yeah, open it in the browser. There we go. So they're right here, and they were at October 16th in general. Okay. So this is the accomplishments. This is it's accomplishments, not projects, but this is actually projects. Yeah, this gets screwed up when you put it in, like you open it like this, but basically, you have accomplishments in 22, accomplishments in 23, and then hold for like a project, next steps, and then one big idea or large scale goal. And then this other one, which is this is the small big ideas. This is the sort of the topical area which you want to address. The small ideas, which are kind of like, what are maybe the small hypotheses or the small issues that we're dealing with. Then the big ideas are how it connects to the larger world, or how it's useful, or how, we can apply it to other things. And then the next steps, which are just kind of like, how do I need to realize this? So a lot of times, that's where people fall down. They say, I have these ideas, and they're kind of, I have, a small idea and maybe a big idea, and I don't know where to go. So that forces you to think about the next steps. So these are all, so you can do this you can modify that template a little bit if you want. I mean, it's fine, but, just one or the other should work. And yeah, I think even for the things that Jesse's proposing, those templates would work out. Oh, what is author for what? What does that mean? Oh, this is Hakan.
Yeah, where were you seeing Hakan, Morgan? I know he's
Hakan. I think he was at the Brain Criticality conference or workshop or something. Yeah. Trends papers. So he has the trends papers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wonder what he wrote.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if I was gonna say, I kind of wanted to like reach out to the authors and like not in a polite way ask like, how did you write this essay? Like, what was your prompts? I'm really curious what the prompts were. Maybe we can find them somewhere on the internet. But like, what were your prompts to write this? Because I feel like there's a very specific. Ask him about the prompts, Morgan. Like, just call him up. Say, hey, No, but actually, honestly, I think Morgan can probably do that. Morgan's good about that. But like, I'm curious, like, what were the prompts? How did it come about?
Yeah, I think maybe like they asked, what do you see in the future of cognitive science? I mean, something like that.
I wonder if they were like encouraged to be like slightly like not necessarily polemic, but like be a little bombastic or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
Oh, okay. I'm working with Neurotech X Japan to start some initiatives there. So yeah, that's great. Yeah. He just moved. Yeah. So, any other things on the open house we want to talk about, or? All right. So we'll follow up on the big session later. I mean, within the month, we'll kind of decide what we want to do on that specifically. And then I look forward to people's talks. You can record them, and I think I gave you a place to submit them. I don't know. I can repost that.
Oh,
But
to try.
yeah, because it's like video, you can't really send an email or, But yeah, so we'll have that. Yeah, so I look forward to that. That's moving along. I'm glad.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. So, do we have any other things that people want to talk about before we move on, or floor?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being in the writing room
Yeah.
this weekend. That's my goal. Like, I gotta bang out all these presentations and some other stuff.
Okay.
That's my goal. That's my goal. Draft by Sunday night of each presentation for me. Let's put on the record, challenge myself.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have some things to present. Let's see. These are November 12th. We have a couple things. This is something that I found on, I think this may have been like something Brian found, and I put this in our curriculum that we have in the Representational Brains and Phenotypes website. We have this interdisciplinary curriculum. If you go to like education, there's an education tab on the website, and then you can get there are a lot of different online resources that are collated there, sort of for different fields, like for computational neuroscience, or for what we call neurosimulation, or for complex systems, networks. This is a course that I think was hosted by Waterloo University, and this is simulating neurobiological systems. So this person's course materials on this, and they're all on YouTube. They kind of give an overview of simulating neurobiological systems and the way that they think about it. So there's a lot of, computational neuroscience in this channel, and a lot of different topics. There's one about building your own critter, which I found was really interesting. So, we talk about like building Bradenburg vehicles. We talk about some of these other types of neural models, computational models. This kind of brings us together in a way I think is really, useful for getting up to speed on some of these things. And so, again, they have a particular perspective here, but it's, I think it's pretty good at covering a lot of the basic concepts that you need to do to realize something like this. So you can actually build a simulation. You go through some of the concepts first, and then you build up to like building an actual model and implementing it. So there are more than 6 lectures. I just took a screenshot of this. So then, there's this other, let's see. They have this, I want to bring this mind map back up for those of you who don't remember what a mind map looks like. This is a mind map here of synergies and coordination dynamics. So again, we're drawing from physics, mathematics, physics again, kind of in 2 different places, coming into this box, which is where the synthesis happens. You're synthesizing physics and math with ecological psychology and motor physiology. And then out of that, you get a model, a dynamical systems model for rhythmic behavior. You have a specific model that gets built in response to all these things out here. And so this is just a nice example. I was talking before about the need for synthesis, about the need for these, or Jesse mentioned linked maps. This would be kind of a very simple linked map. But you can imagine like having a mind map where you take a lot of different concepts from physics, math, maybe like, psychology or sociology, maybe like physiology and neuroscience, and then maybe even like computer science, and then just bring them into this synthesis where, you say that these people did this work, these people did this work, and there are these models that result from it. So it shows people the sort of the lineage of ideas that goes into this thing that you see in the world. If you go back to these neurobiological systems, I mean, this involves a lot of this interdisciplinary, these tracing ideas from different areas. So this is a very useful thing on top of like learning about these basics. learning about these other things, these historical trajectories of ideas, because it does, you do this in regular fields. Like if you go to a class on any field, they always go through the history of the field, and they always talk about like the progression of things. But a lot of times in classes, they talk about it as very like immutable. In other words, like these are the luminaries in the field.
Yes.
But then, it's like, well, there are other ideas that were around that got supplanted. A lot of times these experiments that we talk about are messier than we present them now. So, there are a lot of things going on in the history of the field that's important for today. So yeah, it's a definitely something we should revisit, I think, at some point, because I think there's a, drawing those out is going to be like that would be like an exercise in education. Like pick a field, draw these maps, and explain why like these ideas are predominant and why other ideas aren't, and why, what are the key papers and experiments. And that's usually the way they do, but you're doing this from multiple directions. So you're seeing like not only like the ideas, but then like an experiment. So, you have that sandpile model experiment that I showed you before, and you have maybe like a neurological recording experiment, and you put those together and you say, okay, there's an insight. There's this mechanism happening in this system. And that's how you get to these interdisciplinary insights. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some papers now. First one is this idea of the Bayesian ghost. And this is something I think Morgan posted in the channel. I can't remember which channel, but this idea is about the Bayesian ghost. So this is an article from iScience. This is seeing a Bayesian ghost. Sensory motor activation leads to an illusory social perception. So you can see a graphical abstract here. You have two agents. I just actually talked to Hussein yesterday about Bayesian models and using them in terms of understanding realism and anti-realism. So this might actually be useful for that work as well. But basically, this is the idea that you have a Bayesian model, which you have this sort of false alarm that results from the Bayesian model. So I don't know how to interpret this. It's kind of vague, but you have these two agents interacting. You have this agent that's being, this motion that's being observed of an agent. So you have agent A and agent B, and you're confirming that agent B exists, versus visual confirmation of these, like, these, I guess, are markers on their body instead of the actual body. So what you can do is you can confuse that with noise in the environment. And then you have to filter the noise and distinguish between the noise of these markers and the actual person there. So you're making a top-down prediction of sensory information. You're viewing this person in the dark. You're viewing their markers. You don't know if it's just noise, if it's just lights moving around, or if it's a person. So you have to confirm that it's a person. Is agent B present or not? If you see noise and you think that agent B is present because you've observed agent B as a set of markers like this, then it's a false alarm, and that's what they call a Bayesian ghost. So there's this literature also on biological motion, and this goes back to the 1970s, where they will take like someone, they'll put them in a suit, like a black suit, and they'll put fluorescent markers on their joints, and you'll put them in a dark room so you can't see the person's body. They're in a black suit. They have these markers, so you only see the light at their joints. And so if you show people these images, they can detect biological motion. They know that it's a person moving, walking, or dancing around, instead of just a bunch of lights moving around. Like if you had a bunch of Christmas lights and you were just jiggling them around, you can distinguish between biological noise and just the noise of something in the environment that looks like it. But you can't always do that. And in this case, they're talking about building a Bayesian model, which would be what the brain is doing to infer these things. And then, of course, you can have these false alarms. So the highlights are expecting a response to a social action can lead to an illusion of another person. So if you, in this case, you're expecting a response to a social action, you think there's a person there when there's not. The brain does not merely respond to social signals, but anticipates social behavior. So this is specifically for social interactions in this paper, but what I mentioned about the biological motion also holds if you're looking at a person and you're trying to see if that's an actual person. Sensory motor activity indicates top-down predictions that outweigh sensory input. So they're predictions that are made top-down from your prior experience that outweigh sensory input and what's going on. So the sensory input might tell you that there's maybe someone there, but your mental model tells you that maybe that's not a person, maybe that's noise. So, maybe if you're talking to a chatbot, you think it's a person, but you know better because you know how a chatbot behaves. But sometimes you can make an error there, right? You can have a false alarm. Illusory social perception is associated with sensory motor and parietal activity, and this is in the brain. So sensory motor cortex and parietal cortex, this is where this illusory social perception happens. So why don't we move to the summary and just put this in more context. So this is seeing a Bayesian ghost, sensory motor activation leads to an illusory social perception. So based on our prior experiences, we form social expectations and anticipate another person's response. So we talk to a person, we expect a response from them. We expect certain responses. You talk to a chatbot or like a bot that doesn't really work very well, you'll get nonsensical responses and you'll be able to tell if that's real, But if you talk to a person, you get something that makes sense, it's a real response. So there's that sort of expectation. Now you're getting an input, a sensory input. You're just hearing what they're saying or looking at them. But then you can also misinterpret that because you have this model, this this prior distribution of responses that you expect. And for the most part, if it's, if those expectations are met, then you make a correct judgment. But if there's some new information in there, someone's doing something brand new, then you might end up seeing a Bayesian ghost. So under certain conditions, these expectations can be so strong they lead to illusory perception of another person seeing a Bayesian ghost. We used EEG to investigate the neural correlates of such illusory social perception. So they're doing EEG analysis of EEG in different regions, spatial. Our results showed the activation of the premotor cortex predicted the occurrence of the Bayesian ghost. So premotor cortex is activated when this Bayesian ghost or this misclassification occurs, whereas its actual appearance was later accompanied by activation in sensory motor and adjacent parietal regions. So this is where there's some activation of motor cortex involved in this, which is interesting. These findings confirm that our perception of others is in strong way affected by prior expectations in such a way that they can prompt illusory social perceptions associated with activity change in brain regions relevant from action perception. So there's this action perception that occurs, and you're engaging these different areas of premotor and sensory motor cortex. Parietal regions involves like memory, long-term memory. So there's this response that draws from your personal priors and actually puts it in the context of some action. They can also contribute to a better understanding of social interaction in healthy individuals as well as persons with mental illness, which can be characterized by illusory perception and social interaction difficulties. So this is something that you can, the Bayesian ghost is, we use Bayesian models and we expect them to be kind of accurate. They converge to sort of the accurate model of the world. But, in a case where you have people with mental illnesses or neurodivergent people where you have a lot of illusory perceptions and difficulties with social interaction, this can make these Bayesian ghosts actually much more common. Much harder to apply a Bayesian model to someone who has that kind of, has those kind of priors, I guess. So yeah, I don't know if there's a lot more to say about the paper. This just kind of shows how they do the data. They're actually looking at someone else. They're looking at social cues from their movements. They do this with looking at an agent, looking at noise, and then they have to make the distinction. And then that's, everything else goes from there. Yeah. More false alarms in the communicative than individual condition. So they found that in a communicative condition, as opposed to an individual condition, so this there were more false alarms or more Bayesian ghosts. As well, they talk about the neural correlates here and the discussion, which is always enlightening. The Bayesian ghost is predicted and accompanied by sensory motor and parietal activation. We talked about that. The involvement of the premotor cortex in anticipating observed actions within a predictable context has been interpreted as mirror neuron activity. So this is where you have premotor cortex is kind of where you get a lot of this action perception and a lot of the planning for action perception. But they're also mirror neurons, and these are neurons that people believe, and there was a burst of activity about 30 years ago on this, that these are neurons that are used in like recognizing other people or recognizing social interactions. They call them mirror neurons because you're looking in a mirror and you're recognizing yourself or other people like you. And it's like, there's this, they're kind of controversial because they were really big 30 years ago and you don't really hear about them too much anymore. But there's this system of mirror neurons that if you go back and you look through the mirror neuron literature, it looks like they're still publishing on it. But I mean, there was a huge burst of activity a long time ago. So
mirror neuron summer and now winter.
Well, it's like what happens with a lot of concepts is that they get popular. People propose them, they get really popular, and then they say, and it is like that. They say, well, is this really useful? Can we really find these neurons in the brain? And because people were attaching all sorts of significance to it, like
Well, and I don't know if everyone remembers, but when this happened, at least in the arts community, this was super exciting because it came out of this art project where this artist came up with these helmets that were connected in such a way that you could only see another person's eyes, and they could see your eyes. And the idea was that two people sat right across from each other with this giant apparatus on and just looked only at each other's eyes. And so they started putting EEGs and doing other testing on people undergoing this experience and found information on mirror neurons. I actually have a friend who became a neuroscientist because of that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know what? I would really like to have a discussion about that. Both like from the art, like from art inspired aspect of it too. So I don't know if I know we have a bunch of things to talk about already, but like maybe next time we could dive into that or something because
that'd be great.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot there. Even in terms of it kind of reminds me of some of the things about the workshop I'm not attending at SFN about virtual reality and stuff. So yeah.
Morgan said it sounds very hyper scanning. And you mean by that where it became really popular and then no longer. So I remember there was a spate of hyper scanning about 15 years ago maybe, where they started doing it.
Oh, I missed it.
Well, where they take multiple fMRI machines or EEG and they record from the people, they give them a common stimulus. So you could do it with EEG, you could do it with fMRI machines, and you put them in the same place and you give them the same stimulus and you just record the different brains where they could be interacting. Yeah, they could be interacting with each other through this, in an EEG you can do it better, but in a scanner you would have them play a game with each other or something, and you would just get their responses, and they'd be interacting in that way.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting to revisit, and because the mirror neuron work is to some degree is a little like the limit work.
Yeah.
It brings up interesting issues, but it also has kind of difficult, methodological and interpretation difficulties. That it's easy to run too far with it.
Yeah.
But of course, anything that gets someone spurred to study neuroscience is a good thing. Yeah. but it would be good to, yeah, I'm curious about that link though. I mean, you know, the just having two people looking at each other
Yeah.
should actually bring about the kind of, at least the kind of social interaction hyperscanning effects that like somebody like Guillaume Dumas is you know, is like working on doing. For instance, is like one example.
Yeah. Then Morgan posted a paper here in the chat. This is the Seeing a Bayesian Ghost. So that's the paper link.
Yeah, sorry, but you just asked for a link. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's that. So yeah, let's see if there's anything else in the paper that's really interesting here. With respect to the activation of the sensory motor cortex in time segment 3 before the response, there is evidence that mirror neurons are also present in the primary motor cortex. And several studies emphasize the importance of somatosensory areas for action observation of mirror neuron activity. Moreover, alpha and beta rhythms, which are these EEG rhythms that you can classify from EEG data over the sensory motor cortex, were suggested to serve as an indicator of mirror neuron activity in somatosensory as well as premotor and inferior parietal cortices. So as you'll notice, there's a lot of this stuff with the somatosensory, with the motor cortex, and then parietal cortex. So the motor cortex, of course, is where you're doing a lot of motor planning, but you're also doing a lot of fictive activity or action perception, which is interesting because if we think of motor cortex, I think, well, it's motor activity. But it's not really that. It's more, you know, there's like, you think about like other people moving, you think about their actions, and it's not just their actions or their words, it's like they're moving, like their mouths or their bodies. So it's really interesting how some of these things get activated. And again, you know, this is all like from, you know, we're kind of inferring these things. We're saying there's activity in area X, and but you know that area is activated for other things that are maybe not directly related to that. So why is that? You know, so that's very interesting work. Yeah, and I agree. We should go over the idea of mirror neurons, if for no other reason than really just to understand like why you would be interested in that sort of thing. I mean, you know, what can it do? What can it do? That, you know, having a category like that, what is it? How do you refine that category over time? Because, like, you know, sometimes categories get made and people throw a lot of stuff in there and they say, well, of course, there's this thing here and there's this thing here. And they do all these experiments and they find a lot of things. And then some of those experiments, though, you know, they don't really, I mean, you find out why those things get activated, or, you know, you refine your category some more based on really kind of synthesizing some of that information. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's good. Good paper for that. Okay. This other set of papers I've been kind of sitting on, and so this is the development of cross-modality. So we'll start really with this paper here, and there are a couple of papers here. I think it's going to go from C. elegans to like humans to like just a general mammalian review. But this is the first one we'll talk about is in C. elegans. This is the roundworm, and they have a very simple nervous system relative to humans. But they talk about multisensory integration, which we've talked about before, is the integration of two sensory inputs into a single sort of, I don't want to call it a neural representation, but a single thing that you can actually use to look at. You know, that you get information, and there's information processing value too. So this is called cross-modulation of homeostatic responses to temperature, oxygen, and carbon dioxide in C. elegans. So C. elegans isn't really interested in like fictive motion or anything like that. They're interested in like the environmental conditions where they are. So it's temperature, oxygen, carbon dioxide. They need to sense all these things pretty accurately to survive. So the abstract reads, different interoceptive systems must be integrated to ensure that multiple homeostatic insults. So a homeostatic insult is when you just basically put an organism in some suboptimal conditions. So like if you,
An awesome term.
yeah, homeostatic insults.
Exactly, right. All the time.
Yes. So if you took a human and you put them outside without a coat in the middle of winter in like Canada, that would be a homeostatic insult, and you'd have to recover from that. So, so ensure that multiple homeostatic insults evoke appropriate behavioral and physiological responses. So what this means is that you have these systems that are what they call interoceptive. They're sensing things within the body. They have to be integrated, and this is where this multisensory integration comes in. The insults, of course, are these outside shocks, and then if you want your system to recover from those, you have to be able to sense the body at all times and some of these things that are going on. So little is known about how this is achieved. Using C. elegans, we dissect cross-modulation between systems that monitor temperature, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is less aversive to animals acclimated to 15C, which is they raise C. elegans at different temperatures in the lab. You can raise them at 15C or 25 Celsius and 22 Celsius. So they're different conditions. People use these often in experiments to distinguish between different responses. Sometimes different mutants prefer a different temperature, but they can, if you raise the temperature, lower the temperature, basically, you're introducing a homeostatic insult. So this is important for this experiment. This difference requires the AFD neurons, which is a specific type of neuron. Every neuron in C. elegans has like this code, and this is AFD, and there's a left and a right. So, but anyways, which responds to both temperature and CO2 changes. So these neurons have to be in place in order for these things to be sensed and responded to. CO2 evokes distinct AFD calcium responses in animals acclimated to 15C or 22C. So the calcium response is just something in the cell that is just, you can measure it. It's a response to some stimulus. Mutants defective in synaptic transmission can reprogram AFD carbon dioxide responses according to temperature experience, suggesting reprogramming occurs cell autonomously. AFD is exquisitely sensitive to carbon dioxide. Radiants of different concentrations evoke very different carbon dioxide responses from gradients of different types. So there are two different gradients that they provide this organism, and they can distinguish between them and respond appropriately. Ambient oxygen provides further contextual modulation of carbon dioxide avoidance. At 21%, oxygen tonic signaling from the oxygen sensing neuron URX inhibits carbon dioxide avoidance. So there are different ways that you can inhibit this avoidance of carbon dioxide. And you can play around with this and you can see how they respond. And this basically is just taking apart this homeostatic circuit and playing around with different levels of these chemical stimuli and how the organism responds to them. In a natural wild isolate, which is like what they call a wild type in genetics, but basically a natural genotype. So it means it's not a mutant. A switch from 21% to 19% oxygen was sufficient to convert carbon dioxide from a neutral to an aversive Q. So at some levels of oxygen, it's they don't really respond to it. But at some point, there's this switch that goes off that makes it aversive, or that makes carbon dioxide aversive. They just run away from carbon dioxide, and that's it. This is this very simple type of system that C. elegans has. They don't really make a lot of distinctions between, they'll make distinctions between different concentrations, but it's a very sharp signal. The sharp tuning is confirmed partly by the neuroglobin 8-GLB5 modulatory effects of oxygen on carbon dioxide avoidance involve the RIA interneurons, so they're interneurons that play a role, and it's between this ERX neuron and other places. So the interneurons are between the sensory neurons and some other neurons that exist in a circuit. So the interneurons actually play a role in integrating a lot of these signals. Ambient oxygen and acclimation temperature act to combinatorially modulate carbon dioxide responsiveness. So they work out this architecture. It's very technical. If you're not familiar with some of these experiments, basically they're able to show how this homeostatic circuit works. It's a series of neurons that are integrating the information and there's tuning. When you hit a certain concentration of something, you run away. And it's kind of like when we sense maybe like carbon monoxide in the room that we go into. Sometimes you can tell if there's something noxious in the air or if there's something dangerous, and that involves our interoceptive systems as well. We have these, they're finely tuned. Sometimes not enough, but you can detect these things in the environment. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about the threshold. It's just like you maybe smell something and you're like, okay, I got to run away. So there's an avoidance mechanism there in humans as well. But these are things that you can see a lot easier in C. elegans. Then we move on to humans, and this is a pretty big jump. But we talked about interneurons, and we talked about multisensory integration, which is in C. elegans just these chemical signals. This is development of multisensory integration from the perspective of the individual neuron. And this is by Stein. Barry Stein wrote a whole book on multisensory integration, Stanford and Roland. So this is a good paper for looking at like multisensory integration if you're thinking about like auditory and visual stimulus or auditory and haptic stimulus, touching things and hearing things, integrating those cues. So the ability to use cues from multiple senses in concert. So this is where you're taking senses and you're integrating them. You're touching things, you're looking at them, you're touching them, you're hearing them. Those things have to be integrated. They don't just come prepackaged. Is a fundamental aspect of brain function. It maximizes the brain's use of the information available to it at any given moment and enhances the physiological salience of external events. So when you just see something happen versus you see something and you hear something, that makes it more salient to you. If you see a car crash but you don't hear it versus seeing it and hearing it, that makes it more salient. And there's a response that they call like a non-additive or sort of multiplicative response, which is that when you combine auditory and visual stimuli, you get a much stronger response than if you just have one or the other. And this is something that happens physiologically. I don't know if they'll talk about it in this paper, but in any case, because each sense conveys a unique perspective on the external world, synthesizing information across senses affords computational benefits that cannot otherwise be achieved. So multisensory integration not only has substantial survival value, like in the C. elegans example. If they can move away from noxious chemicals, that's great. They survive. If they can't, then they die. It's pretty simple. But, there are a lot of cases where maybe if you know a car crash is bad because you can see it and hear it, then that helps you not, want to be in one. Maybe that's not a great example, but survival value, I think, is worth thinking about there, but also can create unique experiences that emerge when signals from different sensory channels are bound together. So this is where we talk about experience and about some of the things we talk about creating experiences. We talked about this in cognition futures, where if you want to experience something, you have to do it. But to do it, you have to engage your senses. You can't just read a book on it. Experiencing is more powerful. So this is where these unique experiences are very useful. However, neurons in a newborn's brain are not capable of multisensory integration. So this is a developmental perspective where you don't start out with multisensory integrating. You have to learn it. Well, it develops. You don't necessarily have to learn how to do it, but it develops after you're born. And studies in the midbrain have shown that the development of this process is not predetermined. So this is not something that emerges from an innate wiring, but it's also not something that you have at birth. So it's developing along the lines of experience. Rather, its emergence and maturation critically depend on cross-modal experiences that alter the underlying neural circuit. So you can do this without really having much cross-modal experience, but cross-modal experience helps tune this process. And like we saw with the C. elegans example, if you experience a lot of these cross-modal experiences and you engage this mechanism, it can be tuned quite well and you can get more out of it, I guess. It optimizes multisensory integrative capabilities for the environment in which the animal will function. So this is actually, I said it was humans. They did a lot of their experience on cats originally. So there are some great pictures of cats in really weird, like experimental settings where they're like, I think we had the one where they were running around a treadmill. They have this book on multisensory integration where they have like all these pictures of cats doing these behavioral experiments. It's really kind of, that was the model system that they used. But they also, this is, I think, more generally specific to mammals, mammalian brains, even vertebrate brains. But they go through this and they kind of give this general mechanism for integrating information from different modalities. And of course, it's very useful for a number of things. And so they kind of focus on the superior colliculus, which is a part of the brain that integrates vision and auditory sensation. So they had a number of studies that used the cat superior colliculus as a model. Since that time, multisensory neurons have been identified in many brain areas and species. So these multisensory neurons are all over the brain, but they use the superior colliculus as like the model. But most of the information about their development has been derived from studies on the cat superior colliculus. And then the neurons in the deep layers of the superior colliculus are primary sites of multisensory convergence. So these are neurons in overlying superficial layers of this structure are purely visual. So superior colliculus takes in visual information. It goes deeper into the structure. It integrates with auditory information. And it makes that it acts as sort of those inner neurons that we saw in C. elegans. Here's some pictures here. So this is our cat looking at a mouse. It's listening to a mouse, looking at a mouse. This is the superior colliculus, and this X, and it's taking in information from the somatosensory, auditory, and visual cortices, and it's integrating them in this site. And then you have this developmental trajectory where you have birth. So at birth, you can touch things. In about a week, you end up starting to hear things and making sense of them. Then in about 3 weeks, your sight really comes online. And this is where you get this multisensory convergence from about 1 week to 4 weeks post-birth. And this is where all the senses work together. I guess you can see at birth, but they don't get integrated with touch and hearing until about 3 weeks. And then at the end of 4 weeks, you have this full set of sensory streams that are separate, and then they're online. And then from 4 weeks to 12 weeks, you get integration. So this is when integration starts to happen in earnest, and you get all these combinations of different sensory streams. And this is where you're learning about this. This is where it's being tuned. So as you move on to adulthood, you get these different multisensory streams that result, and they're very highly tuned. And so you don't have to think about it. You don't have to focus on it. It just happens. And in fact, it's so much a part of your experience that you don't even think about, like, what if I just looked at it and didn't hear it or touch it? I mean, there's some things you can't touch or hear, but that's how this works. And of course, if you're born blind, or if you're born without hearing or without touch even, this affects this model. So this is all experiential in this part. And but it's based, it's very well integrated in the brain. It's not like you can just pick any part of the brain and do this. There are certain neurons that are involved in this. And so there's all sorts of enhancement, what they call superadditivity, that is involved in this. You get enhanced responses to events when you can integrate the stimuli. And they have a mathematical model of this. In fact, you can use a Bayesian model to model this, expecting a certain signal at a certain time. They've done experiments with cats where they put the stimuli at different orientations. So they put them like the vision on the visual stimulus on the right side, the auditory stimulus on the left side, and that can be confusing, and that can lead to like less multisensory integration than if you put the two sources together in the same spatial location. So you learn these things in development, but then as an adult, you're using them. You do expect some like continuity in the stimulus. When those things are separated out experimentally, the response can be weaker. So there are things that really, we can learn about some of these, how these things work by setting the experiment up in certain ways. So finally, I'm going to go to the last paper here, which is this multisensory integration in C. elegans in comparison to mammals. Now we talked about C. elegans, we talked about mammals. Now we can make the comparison between the two. And this is from a Chinese research group, and they're looking at C. elegans, but they're making this sort of analogy to mammals. So let's see how they do relative to the other two papers. So multisensory integration refers to sensory inputs from different sensory modalities being processed simultaneously to produce a unitary input. So these things are processed in time simultaneously, and there's probably a spatial component, although it doesn't have to be spatially consistent. That does affect the sort of the strength of the response. Surrounded by stimuli from multiple modalities, animals utilize multisensory integration to form a coherent and robust representation. So now we're talking about representations of the complex environment. So we're using multiple modalities, we're building a representation. The multisensory integration part will allow us to build these unified representations. So now we know the proper place of vision and of sound. And this affects, of course, when you decouple those things in space. You can decouple them and then the response is less salient because you're expecting this integrated experience and you're not getting it. So even though multisensory integration is fundamentally essential for animal life, our understanding of the underlying mechanisms, especially at the molecular, synaptic, and circuit levels, remain poorly understood. The study of sensory perception in C. elegans has begun to fill this gap. So they're using C. elegans as a way to really kind of get at this, but of course we also know that they've used cats as well, and other model organisms. We've gained a considerable amount of insight in the general principles of sensory neurobiology, owing to C. elegans' highly sensitive perceptions, relatively simple nervous system, ample genetic tools, and completely mapped neural connectome. So we know every cell and what it does, we know how they perceive stimuli, and we know that we can look at their nervous system cell by cell because it's 302 neurons. So these circuits are like maybe 15 to 20 neurons. They're very easy to manipulate. Many interesting paradigms of multisensory integration has been characterized in C. elegans, for which input convergence occurs at the sensory neuron or the interneuron level. So you can have sensory neurons and interneurons. You can have convergence of input at the sensory neuron, and then at the interneuron, you can take information from multiple sensory neurons and integrate them. In this narrative review, we describe some representative cases of multisensory integration in C. elegans, summarize the underlying mechanisms, and compare those with mammalian systems. Despite the differences, we believe C. elegans is able to provide unique insights into how processing and integrating these inputs can generate flexible and adaptive behaviors. And so they kind of talk about they kind of make some broad comparisons here. They kind of go through the biology of the C. elegans, the circuits that are involved in this. You have polymodal sensory neurons that take stimuli from different modalities. So this is a polymodal sensory neuron, and that leads to behaviors like movement and avoidance, which is where they back up. So these are things. Then you have these different types of circuits, two-layered circuits and hub and spoke circuits that are involved in different types of behaviors, social behavior and foraging respectively. So there are different architectures that are useful for facilitating integration for specific behaviors in C. elegans. And then finally you have this, I'm looking for the comparison with other organisms here. They talk about how in mammals, this is not an inherent ability. Even in the newborn rhesus monkey, the neurons in the superior colliculus cannot integrate coincident cross-modal sensory stimuli, which means they're in the same place or happen at the same time. Its emergence requires cross-modal experience. Not so much is known about the mechanism driving multisensory integration and development. Now, we don't know that about C. elegans. We think it's hardwired, but only a few sensor-related studies looking at sensory processing across development have occurred. And in C. elegans, you have a very long larval stage, which is their juvenile stage. They know that juvenile worms are different from adults in multiple ways, and there are differences in the way that they engage in food-seeking behaviors, for example. And those can be, that period of development can play a role in training these networks and the multisensory integration. So this paper kind of gives a very broad perspective on this. They kind of bring together the two types of systems. And, I mean, there are a lot of things that C. elegans does that mammals don't do. They do, there are different types of stimuli, different types of stimulus systems. We think that temporal integration probably happens in C. elegans. We know that that maybe there are analogies. So we kind of try to make analogies between the two organisms, but they're very different. And so we're trying to make these comparisons across systems. They do have some similarities, but it's hard to really make a distinct comparison. So, So I think that's a good kind of introduction to that. I know it's a very hard thing to wrap your head around, like the C. elegans biology and the mammalian biology and the nervous systems. But I think that, I think this is useful to a lot of things in like simulating intelligence, but also in experience and phenomenology that are really kind of, we haven't talked about too much, really.
Yeah, I'm going to read more of these papers.
Okay, I'll put the papers in the Slack if you're interested.
Yeah, awesome. Great stuff.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost at time. So, anyone want to mention anything before we go, or?
That's all for me. I'll try to read as much as I can this weekend.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, the open house stuff. Yeah, that's always good to, keep working on. And if you have any questions, let me know. It should be straightforward, though. I don't think it's too hard. And I'm interested to see what people have, and then we'll have that a session maybe later in the year where we do papers. So.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again to Jacob and to Erin for joining us today.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's good to see everyone, and take care. See you next week.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.